I was looking back on the previous month of horror, and a couple notable projects were released that I enjoyed and would love to discuss, and then I also realized that I had a lot to say about some of the other horror films that I consumed this month, thus this video was born. Let's start with the doll that's been on everybody's mind since her trailer debuted back in October, M3GAN. M3GAN is a horror comedy that twists the doll trope with a more sci-fi backstory than M3GAN's haunted peers like Chucky or Annabelle. Looking at the film's premise, it's clear that she's not reinventing the wheel, but the film balances an addictive mix of tension and comedy that is a lot more tight and less heavy-handed than, for sake of easy comparison, the Child's Play franchise. I love me some Chucky, but where Chucky may prefer fourth wall breaks and indulgence in the absurd, for the most part M3GAN keeps it real, and the laughs come in where you may not expect it. That's not to say M3GAN isn't absurd. I mean, this movie is one of the goofiest I've seen in theaters in a while, but the film does a good job at keeping its world and its characters based in reality, which allows for some genuinely tense moments to occur. I think the film's PG-13 rating both helped and hindered it. Cutting back on gore and violence certainly aided in the aforementioned balance of comedy and horror, and that rating certainly had a hand in M3GAN's box office success, but I would have appreciated some extended horror sequences, as for the most part, at its darkest moments, M3GAN creates a tense environment, but it likely won't scare you. Gerard Johnstone, the film's director, has stated that the film underwent reshoots in order to achieve a PG-13 rating, and he said that the original cut was more violent. But he also said that the reshoots made the film better and that the scenes benefited from things being left to the imagination. Who knows if M3GAN will get an unrated cut by the time of its release on digital and whatnot, but I know I would probably prefer that cut. That being said, the film feels like an instant classic, and with its sequel already announced for 2025, it's clear that we're dealing with a brand new franchise brewing here. M3GAN was directed by Gerard Johnstone, whose only other major project before M3GAN was a film called Housebound, a horror comedy from New Zealand where Johnstone also is from. M3GAN was written by Akilah Cooper, who you may recognize as a supervising producer and writer on season 6 of American Horror Story Roanoke, where she wrote Chapter 5. You may also know her for writing Malignant, a film I also really enjoyed and am overdue for a rewatch of. With Malignant and M3GAN, and now with M3GAN 2.0, she's already attached as writer for that as well. Akilah Cooper's booked and busy, and the material speaks for itself. I'm excited to see not only the future of M3GAN, but the future of Akilah Cooper's career. M3GAN's got great writing and great direction, and the casting is also incredible. Allison Williams, I knew her only from Get Out, and she brings a similar hint of uncertain motives to this character, but all in all, she carries the narrative of the film essentially as a mad scientist who has created a monster. M3GAN isn't a perfect film. There are a couple scenes that just didn't work for me the way that I imagined they were intended to, but when the movie hits, it hits hard, and there is just so much potential for this series to go in the future, and I hope I haven't spoiled too much if you haven't seen it. I know I've not spoiled more than the trailer though, so if you've not seen M3GAN yet and it's playing near you, give it a shot, or wait a few weeks till you can stream it somewhere for free. The next new release that I watched that I want to discuss is Sick, a Peacock original slasher film directed by John Hyams and written by Kevin Williamson and Caitlin Crabb. Kevin Williamson is the main reason why I decided to watch Sick. I saw a couple people on social media also praising its chase scenes, likening them to that of Scream. Kevin Williamson, of course, is the screenwriter responsible for not only the best of the Scream films, but a number of other classics like I Know What You Did Last Summer and The Faculty. Caitlin Crabb, who co-wrote this with Williamson, seems to be relatively new as a writer. This is her first screenwriting credit. Her only other credit was on Scream 5, in which she's credited as Kevin Williamson's assistant. Sick for me was more of a mixed bag than most of Williamson's projects that I've seen. That being said though, there's a lot to love about this film, and I did enjoy the film immensely. With a runtime of 83 minutes, Sick gets straight to the point, and no matter what was happening, I can say that I was intrigued and entertained for the entire runtime. The film depends on the pandemic very hard though, and more times than not, it feels like the COVID references are a detriment to what I think makes the film, which is its cinematography and its stunt work. Without spoiling too much, all I'll say is regarding to the film's COVID angle is that the characters all lack logic when it comes to, let's say, wearing masks and things like that, and understanding how to effectively quarantine. And with the world having little to no separation from the actual pandemic, it's very frustrating to watch these characters randomly deciding when and when not to wear masks. This is at least partly by design. I think we're meant to dislike these characters and make fun of these instances. One thing about the film's short runtime that doesn't work in its favor is in regards to these characters. There's not much time to get to know them, and there's not a lot of time to figure out their redeeming qualities, as this scenario seems to bring out the worst in them. The problem with disliking every character is that it's hard to root for them when they're being targeted by a killer. However, the film nails the tension of a home invader scenario almost as well as Scream, so you end up invested in the action anyway. Those chase scenes are executed very well. You can tell a lot of rehearsals, stunt work, and choreography went into making those scenes look so effortless. It is hard to not compare the film to Scream, especially with Kevin Williamson attached, but I think Scream fans will definitely appreciate this one, and I hope Radio Silence are taking note that the fans want some old school chase scenes in Scream 6. Overall, I'm not entirely sure what message the film wants the audience to be left with in regards to the pandemic. I can tell that they're trying to say something, but it's a little unclear which side of the argument the film is on. I lean towards it's making fun of both sides, let's say. That aside, the lead actresses, Gideon Adlon and Beth William, both give believable and effective performances, despite their characters being written so that the audience may dislike them. And the direction and the camera work provided for an immersive home invasion slasher that makes the most of its respectively short runtime. If you have Peacock and love Scream, check out Sick. I'd love to know what you guys thought of it in the comments, so let me know if you've seen it. For the rest of the month, I mostly rewatched some of my favorite horror films, so let's do a relatively quicker rundown of those before I head out. Back in 2020, I started getting into Dario Argento's wider filmography after previously solely being a fan of Suspiria, and a handful of his films from the 70s and 80s have quickly joined the ranks of some of my favorite horror projects of all time. I rewatched 2 of his gialli this month, the first of which was Tenebre. Tenebre came out in 1982 and is sandwiched between the release of Inferno and Phenomena, 2 of Argento's most bonkers films, so it's interesting how grounded this one turned out. Argento is known for his stylization, oversaturated colors, and scenic wide shots, and also for his tendency to opt for over-the-top theatrics, especially in his gialli. Tenebre, though, for me stands out as it holds back on a lot of Argento's trademarks, while still creating a compelling mystery and featuring a signature Daria Nicolodi character who steals the entire show. The film follows an American author, Peter Neal, who is visiting Italy to promote his latest horror novel entitled Tenebrae, when a serial killer goes on a spree inspired by Peter Neal's work. I won't spoil anything else, as true to form, the film is full of a lot of fun twists and turns, and honestly it's one of the more fun mysteries to try and solve in Argento's films. A lot of his films, at least for me, I would have not a chance in hell figuring out where it would end up. But this one was fun to try and figure out. Anyway, like I said, the film is a lot more grounded and less surreal than a lot of Argento's work at the time, but it also does a lot of inventive or unique things for the genre. Firstly is its use of doubles, which is more interesting on rewatch because for every major character in Tenebrae, there's at least 1 or 2 corresponding characters that they resemble pretty closely, whether that's in height and build or hair color, all of the above usually, and Argento uses this to his advantage in subverting and manipulating what is happening before the audience's eyes. Rewatching Tenebrae, these doubles are even more apparent, and with the solved mystery in mind, you can pick up on a couple of clever instances of foreshadowing and ironic imagery in the film. Another one of my favorite things about this film is the crazy backstory that Argento has for the world that these characters inhabit that is almost entirely unapparent in the film itself. According to Dario Argento, Tenebrae takes place 15 years in the future in a fictional Italian city recovering from the effects of a recent atomic blast. Maybe it's the fact that I'm watching this film 40 years later, but the first time I watched the film I had no clue about that fact and did not pick up on any hint of that backstory at all. But watching it now, some of the location and costume design choices make a bit more sense. A lot of times the film is going for an almost monochromatic grayscale color palette, and for the most part the colors that are in the costumes are dull or pastel. I think this does give the film a sort of retro-futuristic vibe, so in some ways that intention does come through. There's also a scene where John Saxon's character gets a video call through a small television set. At least I can presume that it's supposed to be a video call. It lasts about 10 seconds. A woman comes and gives him some memo, and it's barely focused on at all, and the characters use normal era-appropriate phones for the rest of the film. So it is interesting the ways in which Argento portrayed the near future at the time, 1982, but by no means can I pick up on any threads alluding to nuclear warfare or an atomic bomb. If you've seen Tenebrae, let me know what you think about it taking place 15 years into the future. At the very least, it adds another layer onto this engaging and grounded giallo. The score is great too, and it's got a performance, like I said, by John Saxon, who is from two of my other favorite horror films and horror classics, A Nightmare on Elm Street and Black Christmas. And in this one, he's in a much more fun role as Peter Neal's agent. His character is one of the highlights for me in this film. You just have to see it to know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil anything. It definitely stands on its own when you line it up with Argento's other gialli. It's on Shudder right now. Give it a shot if you are into that. If you're looking for an intro to Argento, I'd maybe opt for Suspiria or The Bird with the Crystal Plumage instead to give you a better idea of what you're in for with a typical Argento film. One day I'd love to do a longer form video essay analyzing this film as well as a handful of my other favorites from Argento, but for now let's move on to another Dario Argento film that I rewatched this month, and that is The Cat O' Nine Tails. Having been released in 1971, The Cat O' Nine Tails is Argento's second directorial endeavor following one of my all-time favorites, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. It's also the second of what is often referred to as Argento's Animal Trilogy, as it's followed by another film with a long title referencing an animal, Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Unlike the other two though, there isn't a specific cat in the actual film that the title refers to. It is instead a reference to a line in the film where one of the characters likens the mystery to a cat of nine tails, as there are 9 leads that they must follow to solve the mystery at that point in the film. This trilogy of films were all filmed and released between the years of 1970 and 1971, and for me the characters and plots of at least The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and The Cat O' Nine Tails blend together a little, and stylistically the films look pretty similar as well. That being said, they both have some of my favorite Argento visuals of all time, and I think that the film's visuals playing hand in hand together makes sense given how closely together the films were produced. The Cat O' Nine Tails mystery isn't sparked by a murder contrary to tradition, as instead the mystery begins when a genetics institute is broken into in the dead of the night. The intruder, though, steals absolutely nothing, not even a paperclip, as one character recounts. As you may have guessed when I mentioned the 9 leads that the characters had to follow, the film isn't Argento's easiest mystery to solve, and with its science fiction twist involving chromosomes, The Cat O' Nine Tails certainly keeps you guessing. The film stars James Franciscus as Carlo, a reporter who works with Cookie, a blind man and retired reporter played by Carl Malden, to solve this mystery. Murders do occur in the film, and one scene involves poisoned cartons of milk, and I think of that entire scene at least one time a day. The character that steals the show in the film is Anna Terzi, played by Catherine Spaak, Anna is the daughter of the head of the institute, and she spends her early scenes completely silent, but she soon becomes friendly with Carlo, and the entire movie is hers from that point on. She's got this drapery ribbon sleeved pantsuit in not one, but two colors, and she can evade cops like nobody's business. That scene where Anna Terzi is behind the wheel racing through the streets of Italy is shot and edited in such a frantic and immersive way. It feels like I'm riding Mr. Toad's Wild Ride watching that sequence. The film also has some underrated production design and costume design for Argento's work, and is really memorable for the risks that it takes, in my eyes. If I were to give small critiques, I do think that Argento nails the mystery and story elements a lot better in some of his later work, and even his one film that precedes this. But Cat o' Nine Tails definitely has a lot of character, and it's a very fun film to rewatch, as I'm discovering most, if not all, of his films are. It's on Shudder right now with Tenebre as well, if you're interested in watching either of those. But the last horror film that I watched this month was a rewatch of Friday the 13th Part 2. Of all of the iconic horror franchises, Friday the 13th isn't one of my favorites, but this year I decided I'm going to try and watch the entire series, as at this point I've only seen up to film number 3. Rewatching Part 2 though reminded me that there's lots to love about this installment and this series, and I was surprised at how much I ended up enjoying it this time around. This is the first Friday film with Jason as the main antagonist, as you probably know, and honestly I think the potato sack look is a little underrated. All in all though, Part 2 builds off of the bloody blueprint of the first, with some genuinely good moments of horror, with more than its fair share of campy and goofy moments as well. If you haven't seen the film, I won't spoil the big moments, but I'll spoil one little thing. The film has a dog named Muffin who goes missing pretty early on in the film, and then a few scenes later, a couple characters discover a dog carcass in the woods that looks strikingly like Muffin. But then towards the end of the film, Muffin just walks into the room perfectly fine, unbothered, with her little bow still perfectly in place, and it's one of the many pleasant surprises that I had while rewatching this, and I just need to know what that little Shih Tzu got up to in the woods for the majority of this film. I think more horror films need to not kill the dog, and I think Friday the 13th Part 2 is an early example of a great bait and switch of a dog's fate. I don't know if I'll actually be able to watch the remaining 10 films in the franchise this year, but if the later sequels can keep up the tone, atmosphere, and balance of camp and terror, then I'm on board to give it a shot. But from what I know about the franchise, I do not have faith that many of these sequels will have the same level of appreciation on my end. That being said, I'm a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, so I can appreciate even the most atrocious films in that similarly lengthy franchise, so I might end up a Friday fan when all is said and done. Alright, those are all the films that I wanted to talk about today. Let me know if you like this format of like 4 or 5 mini reviews in one video. This video being unrelated to American Horror Story, and in the off season of AHS, it's bound to sink to the bottom of the algorithm, so if you want to help its chances a little, a like or a comment go a long way, and make sure that you're subscribed because I'm working on a handful of other videos that I'm excited to get out to you guys within the next couple of months, one of which is a part 2 to my Death of American Horror Story video, which I'm basically analyzing the evolution of the show's writing and its casting, and the evolution of its fan base. Hopefully at least 1, maybe 2 videos a month for this off season, so stay tuned for that and a few others. Like I said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.